Well, as you might expect, the big story, of course, we're going to be talking about tonight is Syria. President Assad is no longer President Assad. The tyrant to use chemical weapons against his own people is now in hiding in Russia. And right now, Syria's future hangs in the balance. It can often feel like in the UK, those huge international events happen around us rather than to us. They're not something we can really influence or shape. But, I wonder if that is strictly true. Over 10 years ago, in 2013, MPs here in Westminster made a big decision about Syria. It was after Assad used chemical weapons for the first time against his people, an appalling war crime. The West condemned it, and President Obama said if he did it again, then America would strike. Well, within weeks, Assad did do it again. And here in Westminster, MPs then voted against taking part in airstrikes planned by the US. Without the support of the UK, Barack Obama backed out too, and the red lines in Syria were scrubbed out. Now, it is impossible to know what would have happened if that Westminster vote had gone the other way. And it is, of course, worth pointing out the decision was very popular with the public. 74% of British people said MPs were right to decide not to take part in the airstrikes. Western intervention, after all, has a pretty appalling track record. But I guess it's also a reminder that inaction has consequences too. And on the show tonight, we'll be giving you the very latest on the situation in Syria and asking what next, because clearly that is a question that so many people are asking. Over the course of the day, those questions were being asked of Number 10 as to why the UK wasn't following other European countries like Germany, Austria and Sweden and pausing asylum applications from Syria. And tonight, the Home Office confirmed they were following suit because of the very fast-moving situation on the ground in Syria. We'll hear more on the UK government's response in a moment, but first, let's just get the latest on what's been happening today in the region. Here's Sky's international correspondent, Diana Magnay.
What a moment this is. Time to unfurl the new flag over Syria, the flag of the opposition, finally victorious after 13 years of civil war. Time for the people to celebrate their liberation from the Assad family tyranny, half a century of suffering under father and son. Now their future is in the hands of these men who are promising tolerance and an amnesty for all military conscripts. Former al-Qaeda allies, they say they are reformed, and for now the people seem confident enough.
This is the first time in my entire life that I stand here in this square. I am 60 years old and this is the first time I stand here. People are getting delirious with happiness here. Yesterday was a great day and we were waiting for our children to come back to enjoy it.
And they are coming back. Huge queues at the Turkish-Syrian border. And there will be so many millions more around the world who will be wondering when and if they can do the same. At Lebanon's border with Syria too, the great homecoming, dragging their suitcases behind them.
Today our happiness is indescribable and priceless because what's happening now in Damascus will benefit all Arab nations, as Damascus is the mother of the Arabs.
Cells in the infamous Sednaya prison just outside Damascus are now empty. Their occupants stumbling into a new Syria, leaving the filth of this place behind and the evidence of what went on. And now the sniffer dogs are doing their bit to see what might be buried here. Amnesty estimating that as many as 13,000 Syrians were killed at Sednaya through the height of the civil war. Israeli forces have sent tanks into Syria from the Golan Heights, and its warplanes have hit bases which it says housed chemical and long-range weapons. There are a myriad of different factions at play in Syria. There is sporadic fighting in the northwest between Turkish-backed and Kurdish forces, the video you see here. And the US has hit Islamic State targets in Syria's northeast.
I think that we're going to find that we've been pretty successful. But that's focused on ISIS, to keep the pressure on ISIS and to deny them the ability to easily resurge.
And in Moscow, where Bashar al-Assad has made his inglorious escape, even at the Syrian embassy, they've raised the opposition flag. The Kremlin saying it was President Putin who granted Assad asylum, but that he has no plans to meet him. He'll wait to speak with whoever it is who ends up in power. Diana Magnay, Sky News.
Well, let's get more now on the decision by the UK government to pause any decisions on asylum claims from Syria. Thousands, of course, of Syrians have been granted asylum in the UK throughout the conflict. But the UK, like other countries, is now waiting to see what happens next. This is what the Home Secretary had to say.
We know that the situation in Syria is moving extremely fast after the fall of the Assad regime. We have seen some people returning to Syria, but we also have a very fast-moving situation that we need to closely monitor. And that is why, like Germany, like France and like other countries, we have paused asylum decisions on cases from Syria while the Home Office reviews and monitors the current situation.
Well, our political editor, Beth Rigby, is here with us. Good to have you here, Beth. So just talk me through this decision then on asylum seekers.
Well, the UK, in coordination with countries such as Germany and France, have announced that they are pausing asylum claims, and I think it is the kind of holding position that the government have on all sorts of policy decisions around Syria as they watch the situation unfold. The Home Secretary announcing that there's been about 20,000 Syrian refugees that are now here in the UK. And it has been years of massive displacement of people from Syria, millions of people displaced, over 5 million in neighbouring countries and over 1 million asylum seekers coming to Europe. The majority of whom have actually claimed asylum in Germany. So the Home Secretary pausing announcement there. But actually it's so fast moving that the Foreign Secretary didn't appear to know about this in the Commons and was asked about it by Richard Tice, who I'm sure you'll discuss that with him. But the Foreign Secretary didn't appear to know that this was happening. But there is a pause on it, and I think that it's part of a pattern, as I said, of a holding position that the government are going to take on all sorts of things while they see how it unfolds.
You see, it's so uncertain, isn't it? And I think it feels as if everyone's trying to get to grips with the rebel group as well, you know, who they are,
Yes.
whether they're people that they can do business with, because, of course, at the minute, they're a prescribed terrorist organisation.
No, and it's been a 12-day offensive. Assad has fallen with lightning speed, and everyone is actually struggling to catch up with what this means. And you're quite right, HTS, which is the rebel group that has taken control, is a prescribed terrorist organisation here. And there were questions now about whether the UK will reclassify it. David Lammy in the Commons said, we are not taking a decision. The Prime Minister says they're not taking a decision. This morning on the morning rounds, actually, Pat McFadden, the Cabinet Secretary, sort of suggested that they might try and take this decision quickly. I think that's been rowed back from through the day from the conversations I've had. And basically what the government are doing is what David Lammy said in the Commons, which was this, whilst welcoming the fall of Assad, saying that this is a moment of danger as well as an opportunity for Syria. Lots of uncertainty about this group and previous links with al-Qaeda. And I think they're watching to see, in the words of Lammy, how they treat people and different groups within the country. I think also, going back to what I was saying about the asylum, I think there's an attempt also at coordination. So the UK government doesn't want to take a decision without seeing what the US government are going to do, what the European Union are going to do, what is the UN going to do. They don't want to act on their own. And as I understand it, there will be a call and there will be a statement coming from the Quad. And the Quad is the US, UK, France and Germany. So that is on its way as well. The other thing I would say, though, is that the UK government has recognised the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. They haven't prescribed that as a terrorist organisation. And that means that diplomatically, the UK has a line of contact, because if it's a terrorist organisation, diplomats legally cannot have a contact. And so the US prescribes Iran as a terrorist organ, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. So maybe also the UK is more minded to try and get diplomatic relations going.
Someone needs to talk to them.
But they will do it, I think, in coordination with other allies. So we're waiting and seeing.
That's really interesting. Thank you very much, Beth, bringing us up to speed there with those conversations with Number 10. Thank you. Well, as Beth was saying, everyone grappling to get to grips with what this all means, what could potentially happen next. Let's talk now to someone who perhaps knows better than most, the UK's former ambassador to Syria, Simon Collis. Thank you very much for being with us. Firstly, what are your reflections on the extraordinary events we've seen unfold in the past few days?
It's been incredibly quick. It's happened so fast as we were hearing. I think a lot of people who were following Libya closely knew that the regime was hollowing out, that it had become, there was like a husk, but it would have been impossible to predict how quickly it would collapse once it did. It's how people go bankrupt, isn't it? It's what they say about that. It happens two ways, slowly then fast.
Yeah, I guess it does seem like that. It seems like it's happening with astonishing speed, but I guess for people watching the situation, it was only ever going to end like this. And of course, it feels like an incredibly fragile situation. Different pockets of Syria controlled by different groups. HTS, the rebel group, of course, prescribed as a terrorist organisation in the UK. Do you think we should unprescribe HTS?
Well, I think we have to deal with facts. And HTS are a fact on the ground. They're not the only fact. Syria is a very diverse country, and the opposition itself is very diverse, and there's different groups. That will bring its own problem. But it would be difficult for any outside party, UK or anybody else, to understand what's going on and to engage with what's going on unless you have some kind of channel. It may not be a public one initially, but some kind of channel for communicating with them. Syria has a future now. Under Assad, it had no future. There was no way forward. Now there is a future. We don't know whether that's going to be on the positive side or whether there's going to be more instability and problems. And to understand which way the wind is blowing and to do what we can to nudge things in the right direction. What about protection of the rights of women, minorities, that kind of thing? You have to talk to people about that. And HTS have been talking to their own communities inside Syria. Jolani, the leader, has sent messages to the Kurds, the Christians, the Alawites. He's also done some outward-facing communication, trying to reassure people that he's not the jihadi that everybody thought he was, or that he no longer is that. He talked about being on a personal journey in one of those interviews. But if he has a nationalist focus and if he's able to work with others, then it may be possible to find a way forward. And I think it's very much in our interest to understand that and to do what we can at the margin to shape it, even if it must inevitably be led by the Syrians themselves.
It's interesting you say that the leader's been on he's saying he's been on a personal journey. Do you think we should believe him?
It's what he said, right? We don't know until we see what happens, whether that is just tactical or whether it was authentic. I think it will be important to test that and to give some indication, not talking about conditionality necessarily, but to give some kind of indication of what are the sort of things that we will be looking for, and to talk to others. There should not be any kind of exclusivity here. There was some news this evening that he's appointed a transitional prime minister, and already some voices in Syria are sort of saying, well, who are you to make that appointment? We're not transitioning from one authoritarian leader to another. It's going to be difficult, and no doubt there will be some missteps, and it will be quite a noisy dialogue, knowing the Syrians. But there is now an opportunity of a kind that there was not previously.
Given that opportunity, should the UK be lifting sanctions on Syria?
So the sanctions were on Syria because of the regime. That regime has gone. So that the implications of that need to be worked through. There were separate measures because of the prescription of HTS on HTS as an organisation, a terrorist organisation, and on its leaders, including, I think, Jolani. Certainly in some countries, he is the object of direct measures. And both of those sets of measures will need to be reviewed. I think there's going to be a period of confusion and uncertainty while people explore what's happening, what's possible, and what what matters to support the country to, first of all, stop falling apart, to stabilise, and ideally, over time, potentially quite a short time, to start the process of reconstruction. We're already seeing Syrians voting with their feet, returning. We saw it on your package.
I think the other thing that I was keen to talk to you about as well is the kind of global picture, because as you say, the fall was astonishingly fast, even though it was also a long time coming at the same time. What does it say about the strength of Assad backers like Iran and Russia?
Yeah, the big loser is Iran of the regional players, without a doubt. Syria was their land bridge to supply missiles and other equipment to Hezbollah, which they've been doing over the years since the second Israel-Lebanon war back in the mid-2000s. So that's gone, and it's a result of, clearly the weakening of Iran's proxy network with Hamas, with Hezbollah, weaker, not disappeared. Now the regime fallen. This is very significant. Russia also, I guess, is a loser. The Obama administration's decision not to intervene, which you referred to earlier, and which, as you rightly said, not doing things sometimes has consequences as well as what you do. One of those consequences was to allow Russia back into the region for the first time in a generation. We don't know whether they will be able to retain the seaport that they have in Tartus or the airbase that they have near there. I think the current HTS and the current setup in Syria will have to decide quite quickly what they're going to do about that, whether they go along with it or whether they start looking for an exit. It's very fluid.
Yeah, it certainly is. Thank you very much for at least trying to explain some of the things that are going on. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I want to take you to Syria now, to northeast Syria to be specific. We can talk now to our correspondent Alex Rossi, who is there for us. Alex, what's the latest on the ground?
Well, the situation here is very fluid indeed. We can only really speculate as to exactly what is going on and why this has happened, but you can make out behind me, that's probably about 6 kilometres away. Now, in that direction, that is where a regime base was stationed. Now, clearly, you can see lots of ammunition blowing up. It's an ammunition dump. We think there may have been Iranian missiles stored there. There's a Russian base which has now been deserted as well, when Russia, a key ally of Bashar al-Assad, fled the country, leaving him to his fate. But you can see those explosions now. We can also hear the whinnying of shells as well. We think that that's stuff that's blowing up, and then we're catching the sound of it on the wind. But there's speculation as to who carried out these strikes. We think there were possibly 2 or 3 strikes, possibly air strikes, and the speculation here amongst people is it could be Israeli. They could be hitting these ammunition dumps to make sure they don't fall into the wrong hands. But equally, there's also speculation it could be the Turks as well, who don't want this ammunition to fall into the hands of other groups as well. But you can see, I mean, it's very spectacular here at the moment. I think it also gives you an idea of just how dangerous this moment is in Syria as well. There is, of course, talk amongst people here. You know, people are optimistic, they're hopeful that Syria may be now on a path after these, 13, 14 years of civil war, moving to something better, but equally, it could be moving to something very, very dangerous as well. There are so many competing factions inside Syria, not just on a domestic level, but also regionally as well. The different powers around Syria are trying to kind of bend the country or where it's heading to into what's best for their best interests as well. But this has been going on now. We've been watching this for the last sort of 20, 30 minutes, these explosions. Now, you might be able to make out as well, just to the right of it, you can also see some flashes of orange there on the horizon as well. That was another ammunition dump as well, which seems to have burnt itself out, exploded out. But we do expect, people here are expecting to see more of this in the coming days, and I think it indicates just how dangerous things could become for Syria going forwards.
Yeah, Alex, it's extraordinary footage that we're looking at. Do obviously stay safe out there, but as you say, the fact that it's unclear who is carrying out these strikes, it could be Israel, it could be Turkey, it really reflects how many global players are looking very closely and with concern and alarm potentially at what is happening in Syria.
Yeah, I think that the speed with which all of this has happened has taken everybody by surprise. People inside Syria have been taken by surprise. The international community has been taken by surprise, but also those countries surrounding Syria that have a vested interest in its future don't really, can't understand how quickly that this has happened. Remember, we're only talking a matter of days since the offensive was launched by those opposition groups out of Idlib province into Aleppo and then down the road towards Hama, then Homs, and then into Damascus. And they captured the city, and we've seen President Assad deposed, he's fallen, and he has now left the country. Now, countries surrounding it are looking at how they can best manage the situation, and they see both jeopardy but also opportunity as well. If you look at the situation with the Turks, where I am, I'm in an autonomous region, a Kurdish region of Syria. The Turks look at this and they look at it and see danger. They do not want a powerful Kurdish autonomous region on their doorstep, which they claim could be used by the PKK, a separatist Kurdish organization, to cause chaos within Turkey. So they want to see this place weakened. But equally, they also see opportunity as well. A stable Syria, remember, they've got millions of refugees inside Turkey. You can just hear the whinnying there as it comes out. It's quite loud. But they want to see a stable Turkey so all of those people can go back home, because, of course, having so many refugees in your country has a destabilizing effect. From the Israeli point of view as well, they look at what's happening here. Assad has gone. The Assad dynasty is over. The Shia crescent between Tehran and Beirut has been severely weakened with the Iranian presence leaving the country. That funnel of weapons to the axis of resistance, groups like Hezbollah, has been severely weakened, and they want to make sure that that doesn't rise up and start again. Now, equally, they look at some of the groups involved in the opposition. Of course, the main group involved in deposing President Assad originally had links to Al-Qaeda and also links to ISIS. It has rejected those links. We're just hearing another explosion over there again. It's really hard and unclear the way the sound is moving around in front of us to work out exactly where it's coming from, whether it's coming from the ammunition dump or whether it is another explosion. But you're hearing more explosions now on the horizon. But they look at those groups and wonder, actually, can you believe what they are saying? Can you believe that they are taking this more pragmatic approach? They are rejecting extreme jihadism and emphasizing a kind of more national Islamist policy, which they, I assume, would want to secure for Syria's future. But would that make Israel safer, or would that make Israel more dangerous? So these are the kind of calculations that are going on around the region. Now, internationally, of course, the Americans, they're also looking at this, as the British are as well. How do they engage with these groups? How do they have conversations with them? Do they trust them, or do they keep them at a distance? And I think that's a policy which statesmen all over the world are trying to calibrate at the moment, but not an easy one to work out. Now, the hope here that people have inside Syria is, of course, after the end of the Assad dynasty, a brutal and very cruel regime which caused so much suffering inside the country, that actually a new, better future will be ushered in. We've seen, of course, border crossings where there are nearby very large refugee camps, like in Lebanon and Turkey, people starting to cross or thinking about making that journey to come back home. But again, for those people as well, not easy to calculate. Celebration, but also a degree of grief, really, about what they have lost in the years that have passed since the rebellion started.
And Alex, as we've been talking, I can tell that you obviously can hear and see what you can behind you. Can you just explain to us exactly what it is we're looking at and where we are again?
In the distance, flashes of orange you're also hearing, and we're hearing obviously a lot louder than you are, explosions. We think that over there, that is where there was a regime base, and we're assuming, and I think it's a pretty good guess, that these are ammunition dumps. So there are a number of strikes that came in, 2 or 3 strikes. We heard very, very loud explosions, which would suggest airstrikes. Again, not absolutely certain that they were airstrikes from aeroplanes. They could have been missiles that were launched in. And then we're hearing all these secondary and third explosions going off now. Also the sort of whistling sound of projectiles going up in the air, a bit like a shell coming across, which again, I think is the ammunition exploding over there in the distance. But those, it's about, we're told, about 4 to 6 kilometres away, probably nearer 6 kilometres away. And that is where there were government forces based. Those were regime bases. We think there were Iranians there, also Russians as well. All of them have left. And again, this is speculation, but the guess is that whoever's hit that, and I think the assessment here is it's likely to either have been a Turkish strike or possibly an Israeli strike, is to stop that ammunition falling into hands that those countries don't want them getting their hands on. But these explosions have been going on for, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes now. It's been quite sizable, very noisy here as this plays out. Just to the right of this main one here, it's died down quite a lot now. You can see as well, yellow over there, flashes on the horizon. Again, we think that was another ammunition dump as well. But as I was saying earlier, it gives you an idea of just the fluidity of the situation here in Syria, and also how dangerous things could become. Of course, it has been relatively peaceful so far. Not many shots fired in the capture of Damascus. But of course, the fear is that could change very, very easily, and we could see this country descending into a new bloody chapter of this civil war. The hope, of course, is that won't happen, and actually we will see a lasting peace for Syrian people, which have endured so much misery over the last years or so.
Okay, thank you so much, Alex, for bringing us those extraordinary scenes live from Syria. Alex Rossi there for us. Well, it's been a very fluid programme so far. Time now to bring in our duo for the evening, the Chief Executive of the think tank Labour Together, that's Jonathan Ashworth, and the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. Good to have you here. I mean, I think what we just saw there really just illustrates how volatile this situation still is. You can see almost governments around the world trying to play catch-up. Do you think the UK government's got it right so far in its response?
Yes, absolutely, because it is obviously a fast-moving, fluid situation. I think we can all rejoice in the fall of Assad, a brutal tyrant, as you said at the top of the programme. We've already heard the famous Hemingway quote, paraphrase, that his regime has unravelled gradually and then suddenly, and we celebrate that. But of course, we don't know what's going to happen next. So what do we know so far? Well, first of all, we do as a country have a security interest in the future of Syria and the Middle East. It needs a political process, but it can't be imposed from the outside. The future of Syria is for the Syrian people. Secondly, and I think significantly, and we've not touched upon this so much in the programme so far, is this is an absolutely humiliating moment for Iran and the axis of terror that they have been funding, that they have been supporting across the Middle East for some time. We know Hezbollah has been absolutely smashed in Lebanon. We know what's happening in Gaza. I mean, the Iranian regime, to me, looks the weakest and the most vulnerable it's looked for some time. But broadly speaking, though, this, as I say, is a fast-moving situation, and it's right that the UK government proceeds with caution.
Richard, what's your take on this?
I agree entirely about this point about Iran. I mean, they are the massive losers alongside Russia in this, and hopefully that means that they are weakened, hopefully permanently. But it is extraordinary, that report, I mean, that footage from your correspondent there just shows, you know, who's bombing the ammunition dumps? Is it Turkey? Is it Israel? Is it anybody else? So you've got the external players with huge interest, the immediate neighbours, and then you've got so many groups internally with their own interests, and you've got the main group of rebels led by al-Jilani, who essentially have led this removal of Assad, but they're now saying they want to impose strict Islamic rule. Well, is that what lots of the other internal players want? Is that what millions of refugees want? Question mark. I mean, those are obviously massive issues for the Syrian people, and whichever way this plays out, it's a very tense, pretty scary situation actually for everybody.
Yeah, you were talking about the ammunition that we just saw there. Like, don't know who's bombing it, and we of course know that Assad is someone who had chemical weapons, right? So there's a security risk there as well. Do you think that the UK government should seriously think about doing business with the rebel group, with HTS?
Well, we need to see how this unfolds, and we need to fully understand their motivations, what we think they're going to do next. We know that they have apparently tried to distance themselves from their old Al-Qaeda affiliations, but I don't think we truly know the true extent of of whether those relationships have been truly broken off. So we've got to obviously watch, learn, but in the end, right, Syria needs a political process. It is a very complicated country. There are different traditions, different schools of Islam in the Arab community there. There's a Christian community there. There's a Kurdish community there. It is a patchwork of different faith groups, of different traditions, and that is why I come back to this point. The Syrian people have to decide this. There needs to be a political process. It cannot be imposed by the West. A political process needs to be brought about there.
But also, hopefully, it's not imposed just by one group.
Yeah, indeed, absolutely.
I mean, the Foreign Secretary quite rightly said today that we hear the words of Jilani, who says that other ethnic minorities, other faith groups, you know, should feel secure, but actually it's about the actions. And, you know, we have to remember different but similar connotations with what happened in Afghanistan. Taliban came back, and they said that it would all be fine, that women had nothing to fear, but actually over the subsequent 2 to 3 years, they haven't lived up to their words, and you know, Afghanistan has gone back to being a very, very suppressed and repressed regime. So you know, these are all the things that are essentially in play.
It's a very volatile situation, as you say. So much still to see. Thank you both very much. More from both of you throughout the programme. But coming up next on the Politics Hub, we'll be discussing what comes next for Assad, the man who at one time, of course, was considered a friend of the West. Hello, welcome back. Well, everyone with family and loved ones in Syria will be watching and waiting to see what happens next. And of course, in particular, those people who know someone taken prisoner by the Assad regime, which sadly is an awful lot of people. Turkmani, who was born in Syria, now has British citizenship, I'm very pleased to say, joins us now. She has family in Syria still. And first, I just want to say, your family, like so many, has really suffered at the hands of Assad. So we're very grateful for you for talking about it. Before we talk about your story, I just want to ask, how did it feel to see the events unfold in Syria?
We're still in disbelief. It's a very mixed baggage of emotions. There is the absolute joy to finally see the back of the regime, and also with not much bloodshed. That's the beauty about it. But so far, there was bloodshed, but not as much as we expected. At the same time, all the fear about the country suddenly being exposed, up for grab. We have, strikes over Damascus in the northeast. We don't know even who's striking. Israel already grabbed part of the country. So suddenly it feels so vulnerable, up for a grab, and it's not being grabbed by its own people. That's what really breaks my heart and spoils the whole joy of this historic moment that we waited for so long.
Yeah, it does feel like Syria has almost been oppressed by all sorts of different people, different regimes, different nations, and
absolutely.
And I guess it says a lot about the resilience of the people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this all started with the movement calling for democracy, but we ended up now with those coming to power, HTS. There are people who now, in the area they govern, in Idlib, they have banners all over Idlib saying democracy is evil. So there's just the irony of it is just beyond comprehension.
Do you trust HTS?
Absolutely not. I trust them to do everything wrong. I mean, we have a recent history. We don't have to go very back to cite their practices. Just a few days ago, for example, many women, one of them I know personally, were demonstrating outside HTS prisons. You have many prisons where many people, political prisoners, are detained, and they threw stones at these women and children. They practiced torture in their prisons. They killed so many people. They changed over the years. I mean, 10 years ago, they were executing women publicly in the squares. They've changed so much since then, but still they have so much blood on their hands. And most importantly, they don't represent the vast majority of the Syrian people. So they are not the legitimate power to assume power in Damascus now. We need more a coalition, a broad coalition that represents all the Syrian people.
I want to talk about Abdullah.
Yeah.
Your cousin. He was detained in 2016.
Yeah.
When he was very young. He was what?
He was 18. He was 18, and the crime he committed is supporting the revolution. Not only he was detained, they came and took him with his mother and uncle who was with them at that time, and they only took the mother to add pressure on him, to break him down so that he can confess, so he can hear his mother screaming and he immediately collapsed, and that's what happened. So a few weeks later the mother was released, but we didn't hear anything about him since, except that he was in Sidnaya prison. And his mother now, she's texting me every moment. She's watching all these videos of people being excavated from the Sidnaya prison and waiting for news about her son. And so far, it doesn't look good.
You see, this it kind of breaks my heart. The hope, when you see these people coming out, the hope that you've probably repressed for all those years, and you've had nothing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's... we're all sort of hoping that everyone comes out, but it must be...
The mother, just to give you an idea about the suffering, she's been waiting in homes. All her family left to the US. She was on her own in the house, absolutely on her own, for 6-7 years now. And we were begging her, Kiram, just leave the country, go and live with your other son abroad. Said, no, if Abdullah gets released, he comes back home, who's going to open the door to him? I have to be home waiting for him.
I'm sorry, it's just... It must be such a difficult and stressful time for all of you. What was he like? What was Abdullah like? What's he like?
Just any other 18-year-old, a bit naughty, but a lovely boy, and just finished school, want to go to the university, and then
Yeah. Your mother also sounds like quite an extraordinary woman as well in Syria. She did a lot in the education sector. She sounds like a very sort of forward-thinking woman in Syria. And when she died, you couldn't visit.
No, she was the headmistress of the largest school in Homs, and she usually in Syria, to assume any important position, you need to be a member of the Ba'ath Party, and she resisted that. And there was so much pressure on her to join, and she refused. She stood against many of the practices of the Ba'ath Party people in her own school, and that put her under so much pressure. But she was formidable, an amazing woman. And her health deteriorated in the last, about 5 years ago, and we knew that day is going to come and she's going to pass away. And all I wanted to do is to be there to help her. She did so much to me, and when I was a child, and I wanted to be there for her in her last days, to pay her back, and just not being able to be there, it's just my sisters were all able to fly from all over the world, and I was just there waiting for WhatsApp messages, waiting for them to open the camera to talk to her. But this
because you were on an arrest list, right? Yeah.
This is just nothing compared to what other people went through.
What's your hopes for women in Syria in particular?
If HTS take charge, I have very little hope. Let's look at the women representation right now in HTS. It's 0. I think if there was -0, they could have, taken it to -0. No, I have no hope at all if they remain in charge. That's why I think the international community, who usually supports the women's agenda, human rights agenda, should really insist that for any governing body to be considered legitimate enough to be recognized by the West, supported by the West, it should not be led by this organization. They should have a share in the power. They played a role in ousting Assad. They have their own constituency, their own popularity. Fine, take your share, but don't lead, don't govern, because that will be it for people like me. And we are not people in Syria, the vast majority are not very religious, and most importantly, they don't want to be portrayed or framed as Sunni or Alawite or Christian. There are lots of talks about minority rights, but most people don't care, so they want to be as citizens, equal citizens. They don't want to be represented by somebody who claims that he represents them as sect. I come from an Arab Sunni background. I don't delegate anyone to represent me under these brands.
Thank you so much for coming on the programme, for sharing your story. It's been really important for us to hear your voice tonight, so thank you.
Great, thank you for having me.
We've been talking an awful lot about Syria on the programme, and of course what the changes mean for those living there, those with loved ones there as well. I want to talk now about asylum claims as well, because Richard Tice, who's with us tonight, asked about this issue, and it seemed the Foreign Secretary was perhaps not aware of the change in pausing asylum claims. Let's take a listen.
Will the government look to follow the example of European nations like Germany, who have suspended asylum applications?
I have to say that has not been put to me in the last few hours. The issue that's been put to me is the humanitarian need in country.
And developments from Syria are sure, of course, to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the political editors of The Sun and The Guardian, Harry Cole and Pippa Creer. Right, let's talk again to Jonathan and Richard, shall we? So much stuff to talk about. So I felt very moved, actually, by the woman's that we just heard from in the story about her cousin, who they still don't know where on earth he is. But I did just want to talk about asylum claims, because it's been a big political discussion point today. Richard, you asked about it in the House of Commons, didn't you?
Yeah, it was just an extraordinary moment of timing. I was obviously aware of what had been going on in Germany and France, other European nations, pausing asylum claims, recognising the fact that hundreds of thousands of Syrians will want to go back when they can to help, hopefully, rebuild Syria and be involved in that. And so I asked the question of the Foreign Secretary, and clearly events moving so quickly that he wasn't aware that the Home Office was simultaneously, essentially, announcing that they were going to pause asylum applications here. Look, we understand it's a fast-moving situation, but I think the the key point from your previous guest, very moving talk, was, after you spoke about Abdullah, was also that there are so many different people who are not religious or different faiths, who feel very involved and who don't want to live under a very strict Islamic rule. They all want to be engaged in this process. Shows just how difficult this next steps are going to be.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. Can I just ask on the David Lammy point, just quickly, how does that happen where your Foreign Secretary isn't aware of something as big as that?
Well, I mean, Rich is absolutely right, and I'm pleased you took the gracious route there. And I wouldn't have expected you to do anything otherwise, Richard, obviously. But look, this is a fast-moving situation. I'm a little bit rusty on House of Commons timings, as I haven't had to be in there for 3 or 4 months or whatever it is. So I don't know what time the statement began, but in situations like this, it would not surprise me if by the time David Lammy was on his feet, there probably wasn't time for a message from the Home Office to have got down to him in the House of Commons chamber and so on. These things happen.
You have mobile phones in the chamber.
You're not allowed. I don't think you're allowed to sort of.
Surely?
Look, sometimes these things happen.
Yeah.
It is a fast-moving situation. It would be embarrassing had the Foreign Secretary come to the House of Commons tomorrow and not known that answer, for example. But today, when clearly decisions are being made quickly in response to both what our allies across the West, the decisions they are taking. Obviously, the Prime Minister is in the Gulf today. He's been speaking as well. Look, it's just one of those things. The key thing is that the decision has been taken, and that's the right decision, because I think in the very moving interview we've just heard there is, yes, on the one hand, relief and rejoicing that we've seen the back of Assad, but there is fear about what is coming next, which is why all of these things need to be considered in the round.
If there is fear about what's coming next, does that not, I guess, mean that asylum claims are still valid, I guess?
Well, I think actually the point is about the coordination between the 4 nations, where you've got Germany, France, the UK, the US, very important nations, as well as local nations. Obviously, you've got Turkey, very involved as well. And so I think a coordinated response to this, to try and help the people in Syria avoid chaos, carnage, and further horrors, and move down a more sort of humanitarian transition. But we know how difficult this is. We've seen what happens when regimes fall away very quickly, and sadly, we in the West have been involved in some of those situations.
I mean, is there a security risk as well, I guess, if people are coming to Europe?
I mean, there is. Well, yes. I mean, one of the things why we have a direct interest in this is because we know at the moment there's a number of ISIS fighters who are detained by one of the Kurdish groups and I think the US troops there. I mean, if they are let go, as it were, they are very dangerous people. So whereas we cannot impose a political settlement on Syria, we have a direct interest in seeing a political settlement and a political process succeed. And that could have repercussions for us here or across Europe if we don't see that.
Yeah, the security risks are actually very significant. Bad actors, bad elements looking to come out of Syria into Europe with malintent, and I'm afraid, we know that's very real, and we hope that our security forces, and we have to protect that.
Thanks both very much. It's been a very sort of serious, very sombre programme reflecting the kind of international situation, but thanks both for being on it. I really appreciate it. Well, that is it from us this evening. I'll see you tomorrow night at 7. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee, and then, of course, at 9 p.m, it is The World with Yalda Hakim. Tonight, Yalda is going to be in Beirut with the latest on this very fluid, very fast-moving and very dangerous situation, of course. But I will see you tomorrow.